Welcome to Insights with Dr. Val-Addo, and this presentation is the ninth in our series. And my name is Dr. J. Val-Addo, and in the previous series we started to discuss, or we discussed how Europe targeted Africa and Africans using faulty philosophy, using faulty wisdom. And that actually means how Europeans use their particular original philosophy or a kind of wisdom to undermine Africa and Africans, their future and their development. We peeped into the minds of their renowned philosophers through their writings, and we look at the writings of David Hume from Scotland and G.W.F. Hegel from Germany, and we disputed their claims. And we're going to continue with Herbert Spencer, who lived in the 19th and the 20th century. He was an English philosopher and sociologist. That means he was from Britain, which is also part of Western Europe. Now, in the opinion of Herbert Spencer, a Negro, and I quote him, a Negro or an African, and I quote, is by nature incapable of abstract thinking. He thinks in concrete images only, and his emotions prevail over his reason. Neither can he perceive sophisticated philosophical ideas, unquote. Now, this is another European. We started with a Scottish, we came to a German, and now we are quoting from an English philosopher, somebody from Britain. And he says that by nature, the Negro, the African, is incapable of abstract thinking. Wow! And that he thinks in concrete images only. Once again, he attacked the African personality, that his emotion prevail over his reason. I have promised you that I will tell you in history why Africans and African descent at some point in history will never tolerate whatever the European will do to him. And I will show you from history. And they have come out to write evil things about Africans, and most of them, they write that he thinks that their emotion, Africans, their emotion prevail over their reasoning, and that he cannot think or perceive sophisticated philosophical ideas. Now, let me respond to what this British philosopher said. Before I say that, let me say this. Most of us Africans, or people from Africa or African descent, especially people from Africa, had come to believe that when you see an European, you have seen God. And so they accord them that regard. They place them on high pedestal with a lot of respect. And behind us, this is how they look at us. So he has said so many things, and I'm going to respond to that. Now, I'm going to deal with the allegation that the African is emotional. We have dealt with that, so I don't think we should waste time. Under Hegel, we talk about it. Hegel also said the same thing. So I'm not going to comment on that because it's not worth repeating it. And mind you, if you're an African, that's what the European will always say about us behind the scene, especially when they mistreat you and you react after swallowing it for many, many times, and one day you become assertive and you tell them you don't like it. They are going to tell you that you are emotional and your emotions prevail over your reason. Listen very carefully. And I know Europeans may be listening, that my emotion is not prevailing over my reasoning. I'm really reasoning to expose some of the emotions of Europeans, which Africans in history at a point decided not to tolerate. Secondly, the wisdom granted the African by the Creator is distinct and quite different from that of the Europeans. And that is what Europeans do not understand. No one has all divine wisdom. The Creator has been very fair to distribute wisdom of His to all the larger people groups of the world. The Creator has been so fair, so generous, and to everyone. And we all have little bit of divine wisdom. No so-called race of the Western world has the wisdom in the world in its entirety. And Europeans seem not to get it. The Creator gave them a little bit of it. He gave a little bit of it to Africans, a little bit of it to Chinese, a little bit of it to everyone in the continents of the world. And so if you study Chinese philosophy, you study African philosophy, and you study European philosophy, you will find that each one has a deep way of expressing wisdom, and it's a gift from the Creator to all these people. Instead of harnessing them together and understanding each one and their limitation, like Chinese philosophy, Japanese philosophy, African philosophy, and European philosophy, the depth of it, their limitations, and embrace them together, Western Europeans feel that their thinkers have exalted them, that they are the people who are gifted with philosophy or wisdom in the world. Now, Africans in tertiary institutions or students in tertiary institutions are misguided to study European or Western philosophy only and to get a PhD in European Western philosophy without studying African philosophy as well. Because that is what is taught in European universities, colleges, and seminaries. And that has been transported to African universities, colleges, and seminaries. And so there is a miseducation at the highest level. And that is leading to mind control, by which power is used, because knowledge is power. And when you are exposed to knowledge, and you are exposed to wisdom, exposed to intelligence, exposed to what the Creator has invested in the brains and the minds of humans, you will excel in our world. And so African students in tertiary institutions should think back. Now, I'm not saying we should only study our original philosophy. That is the problem that European philosophy has given to Europeans, because they studied their particular philosophy, their wisdom. They became proud of it. They have the power to make it a universal, and everybody is studying it. And we have studied it. But I'm telling you that we need to study our own philosophy as well, so that we will understand both wisdoms, their limitations, compare and contrast them, and we will be able to excel in the use of power, because knowledge is power. And I hope what I'm doing today is sharing with you the knowledge that we will need to have. And so Europe has targeted Africa, limited us in their study of philosophy, their wisdom, their way of reasoning, their logic, and has thrown everything of the other people groups of the world. The problem is that Europeans have demeaned African philosophy and discouraged its study by calling it ethno-philosophy. They have called African philosophy or any other kind of philosophy as ethnic philosophy. That means it is from that ethnic group, and have exalted years and regarded it as a universal philosophy. However, theirs was and has been the same. It was a particular philosophy. It was a regional philosophy, but deceptively made to be accepted as a universal philosophy. Now, let me talk about, so this is about Herbert Spencer, and this is my response to him, and my response to all people who love wisdom and who appreciate what the Creator has given to mankind in all the continents of the world. And this is how Africans can study their philosophy as well as other philosophies of the world, including the European philosophy, the Chinese philosophy, and compare and contrast them, and you will marvel what each one has. The only thing is that Africans, I remember when we were in school in Africa, we studied geography, history of all the peoples in the world. But when you go to Europe, they don't know much about Africa. Some people even think that Africa is a country, but Africa is a continent, and they don't know the difference. So we expand our knowledge, know a lot of things, and yet they narrow us down to this, while they don't bother to study anything about us. Now, in 1891, there was a newspaper article which was printed in the Berlin newspaper. The Berlin newspaper. Berlin is in Germany. Once again, I brought the Germans in, and this was in 1891. They describe it as very learned article, and I'm quoting it. They claim it to be very learned article, and the contents of the article were brought to light by a German professor and ethnologist, a German professor called Leo Frobenius. Now, Leo Frobenius brought this article to light, and it came into their newspapers, and I want to quote that article, and I want you to listen carefully. And I quote, "Before the introduction of genuine faith and higher standard of culture by the Arabs, the natives, that is Africans, had neither political organization nor strictly spoken any religion, nor any industrial development." Wait a minute. So before the Arabs came, they said that Africans had neither political organization, and we didn't have religion, and there was no industrial development. And so they continue with the article. Therefore, it is necessary in examining the pre-Mohammedan conditions of the Negro races to confine ourselves to the description of their crude fetishism, their brutal and often cannibal customs, their vulgar and repulsive idols, and their squalid homes. None but the most primitive instincts determine the lives and conducts of Negroes who lack every kind of ethical inspiration. And they continued, Black Africa is a continent which has no mystery, no history. These are all lies. How can you say that before the Arabs came, that Africans neither had political organization, we didn't have religion, we didn't have industrial development, and that we are primitive, that we have cannibal customs, vulgar and repulsive idols, and mad houses? Even up to now, people think that when you go to Africa, we are living on trees. I remember about 25 years ago, an African American came to Ghana, where we were living. And when he came, he saw the storied buildings that people were living in. He stood and said, wow, I thought you people were living in mud houses and on the trees. That is the picture that people have painted about Africa and Africans. That is the philosophy that they have put into people's mind. They have targeted Africa by projecting these ideas to people. And he said, Black Africa is a continent which has no mystery nor history. Who told you? Let me continue. They even say that we are people with no souls, or Africans and African descent are people with no souls. Frobenius, the German professor, also indicates that that article, which they call it learned, described Africans as niggers who had no souls and were but bent out husk of men. Now, this article itself is unlearned. It's highly prejudicial and it's misguided. Now, from the previous presentation and this presentation, we've heard all the statements, the derogatory statements that Europeans from different countries, Western European countries, have made about African personality. They made all these statements and wrote all these things and wrote this article even before they set their feet in Africa. And they came there to scramble for it between 1880 to 1914. So you see, I gave you the dates within which the philosophers who said this were born and they died, and they said all these things without stepping their foot or their feet in Africa. And they said all these things. And they put these things in the minds of people. And so they decided that they would send missionaries. And the missionaries will come. And when they come, they came and scrambled and partitioned Africa. They came as agents of their governments, not to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. They came in disguise of the gospel, but had an ulterior motive. And these were the things that they came with in their minds. And so they, between 1880 and 1914, a lot of Western Europeans came to Ghana, including the British, the French, the Belgians, the Swiss, and the Germans. Now, the statements which I have quoted in the previous and this presentation show how Europeans were skewed in their perceptions about Africa and Africans. Evidently, they were ignorant, they were racist to the core, yet some went to Africa to do a kind of Christian missions. with the Bible. The statements which I have quoted from these so-called philosophers, unfortunately, were the thoughts of the best philosophers of Europe. That is what Europe could produce between the 18th and the 20th centuries. Anyone, including Africans who study philosophy or the basic teachings of the great philosophers as a required course at college, university, or seminary, comes across these European philosophers. They seem to be champions of reasoning, of wisdom. But wait a minute. Is this the best Europe could produce in terms of reasoning and wisdom and thinking? And lecturers or professors of philosophy do not take the students further to know the dark sides of these philosophers of Western Europe, to analyze their statements and their comments, especially the racial ones. Rather, they hail them as great philosophers, when in fact they were not, because all their philosophies, most of them, about Africa and Africans were skewed, were questionable. And no African will, even if it's not a philosopher, will make such statements about Europe, nor any other country or continent. Now, I begin to question why some thinkers regarded European philosophy as above all other philosophies, such as that of the ancient Africa and China and other areas that had philosophy and history of philosophy. How could that be above the wisdom of the Creator, or the divine and the Christian approach to philosophy? It's an obvious exaggeration of the Western European philosophical thoughts. And I would like to further question the source or the sources of their knowledge of their philosophy. I want to question it because in philosophy, you will begin to find out the source or the sources of a person's mode of reasoning. And for those of you Europeans, it's called epistemology. And if you have studied philosophy, you cannot study philosophy without knowing the source of a person's reasoning and why certain things were said. So I still want to question whether these people receive their European PhD as an academic achievement. These philosophers, did they really deserve them? And I want to encourage African scholars, because the Creator has blessed Africans with a lot of scholars, a lot of philosophers, wise people. I want them to note this, that they should never cover up for the so-called European philosophers of the 18th to the 20th century who had questionable thinking, like David Hume and what he said about Africa and Africans, like Hegel, what he said about Africa and Africans, like Herbert Spencer, and like the publication of the Berlin newspaper. And so, in doing that, they will save themselves, they will save African students from simplicity thinking due to their innocence and lack of wisdom or judgment imparted through the study of European philosophy. So, in our next presentation, we will take up the hindsight of European perspectives. We will look at how Europeans perceive things, out of which they develop their wisdom and say so many things about Africa. How they see and regard things and impose them on Africa. We will look at some of these things, and we will never allow anyone, including Europeans, to undermine Africa and Africans anymore. We will not allow them to use the scripture or their way of thinking and reasoning and wisdom to undermine Africa and Africans anymore. I hope you will love to hear that presentation about the hindsight into European perspective, way of seeing things and how they regard things and how they impose that on Africa. Well, beloved viewer, beloved listener, you've heard so much information, and everything that I'm talking about or presenting through this medium is in a book form. And if you are interested in the book, we would like you to tell us, and we will get it to you at a low-cost price. It's coming out very soon. You will study more from the things that I'm talking about. Is out of deep conviction that I'm presenting this, and you will have references to everything that I'm saying. I'm not just blasting or saying things. These are on record, and I believe that sharing it with the public, especially with Africans and our leaders, will help us to rise up and reign in life. Actually, the book is called The Rise of Africans and African Descent to Reign in Life. The Rise of Africans and African Descent to Reign in this life. And give us a thumb up if this presentation has been an eye-opener to you. And we want you to click the subscribe button if you want to receive the continuation of Insights with Dr. Val-Addo, and also the share symbol to click it to share, to send it to your friends and your relatives. And if you have any comment, please write it to us, and we will try as much as possible to read it. And if you have any question, we'll be able to answer it carefully. Once again, we want to remind you of the book which has all this information about the scriptural, philosophical factor that undermined Africa. And the book is The Rise of Africans, and African Descent to Reign in Life. God has destined Africans and African descent to reign in this life. And there is a way we have to make record straight and gather ourselves to rise up and to reign, because we cannot be belittled, subordinated, suppressed, taken into slavery, and conscientized with the wrong information. We have to clear our mental faculties and rise up in our own way to reign in life as the Creator will teach us and enable us. God bless you. We love you, and keep watching Insights with Dr. Val-Addo. God bless.